So what we're doing is we're waking up to who we are in Christ. We're waking up to the fact that we belong to a whole different realm and a whole different domain. We belong to the kingdom, and what we're learning is how to see in the kingdom, how to think in that kingdom, how to speak from that kingdom, because now we're in the kingdom, American is our second language. Kingdom is our first language. Yeah? Because God doesn't want you having the language of the world in your relationship with Him. So you're learning a different language. You're learning the language of faith, the language of trust, the language of expectation, the language of promise, the language that's actually rooted in prophetic ministry. God's giving us a language. So when you read through those prophetic words, it has a language that calls you up to something higher, to something more powerful. So don't let the language of the world drag you down, because the devil's always trying to talk you out of something, but God is always trying to talk you into something. Yes. So the New Testament contains a greater paradox of language than the Old Testament. A paradox is two opposing ideas contained in the same truth. So, for example, you have to be last to be first, paradox. You have to give to receive, paradox. Yeah? You have to die to live, paradox. The church is a body and a building. Can't get more paradoxical than that. A building is rigid, inflexible, unmovable. Aren't you glad? Right? But a body is fluid, flexible, and always moving and changing. So the issue for us in a paradox is not either or, it's both and. So building and body relates to being and doing. That who God is for you is rigid, inflexible, unchanging. He's the one that says, I am the Lord, I change not. I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. What does that mean? It means that God has a way of looking at you that will never change. He sees who you are in Jesus. He put you into Jesus so He could have a great opinion of you. Right? He put you into Jesus so He could relate to you in exactly the same way that He relates to Jesus. This is called good news. Right? He has a vision of you that's unchanging. He knows who you can become. And prophecy declares to you, this is how you're known in heaven. So it's like in Luke chapter 1, Zacharias just finished his shift at the temple, and Gabriel comes. It's just a regular Tuesday, and Gabriel shows up. It's always Gabe. What's he doing here again? And Gabriel comes to talk to Zacharias, to give him a prophetic word about his son, who is not even born. Not only is he not even born, he's not even conceived yet. Doesn't that make you annoyed? Some nameless person who's not even conceived is getting a prophetic word. And I've been knocking around the kingdom for 30 years and I've never had one. Makes you spit. Not only that, his mother, they can't conceive. His mother is barren. His wife Elizabeth is barren. And yet here is Gabriel saying, you will have a son and you'll call his name John. And this is what he will do. And what's he doing? He's saying, this is the amazing thing to me. He's saying about someone who's not even been conceived yet. He's saying this is how he's known in heaven. You understand the importance then? That if God can say that about someone who's not even conceived yet, what is he thinking about you right now? Everything we're doing in the New Testament is going to be different than the Old. The cross changes everything. The cross is the place where all the old goes into the ground and gets reborn in a completely different way. And you see that on the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says 5 times, "You have heard it said, but now I say." In other words, what I'm saying from the new covenant is more powerful than what Moses said in the old. We are rewriting this covenant and making it bigger, bolder, and better with better promises in the new covenant. And I'm here. I am the transitional point between the old and the new. So when you look at like the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus takes, 3 of his boys up, Peter, James, and John, and he gets transfigured before them. In other words, they see him in his glorified state like he would be in heaven. They see him, and then suddenly Moses and Elijah appear with him. Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophetic. And so you have in that moment a transitional handover when the law and the prophets come and bow to Jesus, who now becomes New Testament law in himself. And so he says in Luke 16, verse 16, he said these words, "You have the law and the prophets proclaimed until John. But now the kingdom is being preached and everyone is pressing into it." Since that time, the gospel of the kingdom is preached. In other words, the gospel of the kingdom carries more weight than the law and the prophets in the Old Testament. So now the law and the prophets in the Old Testament are now coming and bowing to Jesus, who is the first of a new line of prophets. So John the Baptist is the last of the Old Testament prophets. And he comes and he says to Jesus, "I and all that I represent in the prophetic must decrease, and you and all that you represent in the prophetic must increase." We do prophecy differently in the New Testament than we do in the Old. Yeah?